This week we have Nate Sanford from KNKX, yeah, who reported on the use of ChatGPT and generative AI use in, different government agencies, city governments around the state of Washington. Nate is currently a Murrow News Fellow at KNKX and Cascade PBS. Previously worked for the Inlander, which is a great alt weekly based out of Spokane. Um, but yeah, I know I'm really excited to talk about ChatGPT logs and other things that might be, FOIA eligible. But this week, the way we'll structure it, we'll have Nate talk through his reporting and his strategy, things to keep in mind, and then for a Q&A and stuff like that. But if there are questions that you guys have while we're talking, while Nate's sharing his awesome work, just feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll, answer them as we go if we can. And if we can't, we'll save them for the end and we'll answer them all in the end. We'll also send out a tip sheet afterward with more details and resources and stuff like that, including a really great story and interview between Nate and Alex Mahdavan from Pointer that published, last week or 2 weeks ago. That's got a lot of great resources as well. So without further ado, Nate, it's very good
Yeah. Thanks.
to
Thanks so much for having
have
me.
you on. Yeah.
Yeah, excited to be here.
For sure. For sure. We love FOIA. We love talking about FOIA here. But yeah, I mean, I guess a good place to start. I don't know if maybe you want to walk through some of your reporting and maybe give people a quick lowdown if they haven't read the series that you've been doing and the follow-up since.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So this was a story I've kind of been working on for a while. Basically just I think the central question is like, are local government officials using ChatGPT? If so, how? Um, and so I basically to start like about almost a year ago, I started filing records requests with some of the largest cities in Washington, basically just asking for records of any time someone had used ChatGPT on a government computer. And we'll share the language, the exact language if anyone wants to copy that. But I started getting a bunch of documents back, and it was really fascinating. I think it showed that the scale was a lot more than I was expecting. And it was a lot of a lot of like pretty mundane stuff where people were using it to like for spelling and grammar and rewriting things to make them sound more professional, or like formatting spreadsheets or PowerPoints and things like that. But then you'd also find these pretty frequent examples where it was being used for, I think, pretty consequential government business, like a mayor writing a letter to a congressman, right, or like helping draft policy around like housing, or even like someone asking to draft a use of force policy, right? And just emails to constituents, people asking it to like analyze themes in public comments. So it was just really fascinating. And so we ended up publishing a two-part story 2 months ago, and yeah, it's been really interesting.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I remember I don't know, seeing someone flag the story in what it was probably a Slack group, probably like News Nerdery, I think, which is common for data reporters and other people who are interested in tech and data. Um, and I think the immediate overwhelming response was, "Oh my God, what?" Like people were very dialed in, me included, of just like, yeah, hadn't even thought to request this because I think it just hadn't caught up quite yet of, yeah, the applications being used in government and municipal uses. But like, why, what kind of triggered you to make those requests
I mean, I
and
was,
make
I was
sure
really
that,
curious if it was even possible, if this was something that you could get through a public records request. And I'd kind of been inspired by this like earlier story I did that involved AI and local government a little bit. There was like a porn spam bot on Twitter that was replying to everything that used the word Spokane, which was I thought really funny. And like a state senator got into a fight with it. But like someone kind of mentioned while I was working on that like they were a city employee, and they mentioned we were talking about the story afterwards. And they're like, oh yeah, I've used ChatGPT a little bit. And so I just was kind of curious if it was possible to get more information about that. And I saw a post on Muckrack that I can't find now, but someone had tried doing this with their local police department, requesting like logs related to AI chatbots. So I kind of just decided to do that for like a couple different local cities to see what would turn up. And again, I had no idea what to really expect, but yeah, I think, because it's widespread in the private sector. And there are surveys showing like an increasing number of Americans are using it for their jobs. But I think it's hard to like get a clear sense of what that looks like in practice. When someone says like, oh yeah, I use ChatGPT at work, like what does that actually look like? But with Records Quest, you can get like their literal 2 years worth of every single message they've ever sent, which is just really fascinating to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it fits the bill of something that would be eligible for a records request. Like if you give it half a second of thought, right? Of like, this is something that was, created on, public time, like the taxpayer dime, with, yeah, probably public resource, maybe like a work computer, um, on public Wi-Fi, like on work Wi-Fi, and then, for public business that's being conducted. So kind of similar to an email or a text message. It feels like it would fit right in there. I see Katie in the chat saying my favorite words, taxpayer dollars, which mine too, because then that lends itself nicely to requesting stuff via FOIA. Um, I can share my screen. I've got some examples from the reporting, from the first story that you guys had done of, let me show, of kind of just what had been um, copied over, right? From ChatGPT. Like this one was, I don't know if you want to explain more about the examples that were here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So this was the mayor of Bellingham. Her assistant had used it to write a letter asking the Commerce Department to award grant funding to this to a tribe in the area. And this one, with a lot of the examples, it was tricky because you had to, um, on the left we have the actual chat log, right, showing the conversation where the mayor's assistant says like, using this request for proposals, can you write a letter to the Commerce Department asking for this. But then I had to file another records request to get a copy of the actual letter that was sent. And then it's a matter of, I think it's really interesting seeing what ends up getting changed and what ends up getting just copied verbatim. And there were a bunch of different records like this. There were some where it was like you could tell the person had copied maybe like 50 to 70% of it from ChatGPT. There were also a lot where they'd copied it verbatim, copied ChatGPT's output. There was a letter to a congressman that was entirely like 5 or 6 paragraphs generated by ChatGPT. So one thing with this is I think for anyone else who's doing similar reporting, it is important to like double check the extent to which ChatGPT actually ended up being used,
Mm,
because some people use it differently for like brainstorming or ideation, and yeah, I think verifying like with this, I had to like scroll through the entire Instagram page for the city of Everett to find this one post to see if they had actually used ChatGPT's words or not, and in this case they had. But yes, that double checking I think is important. For things like this.
yeah, and you mentioned too in the story, in the it was the first installment in the series about how some employees were maybe better at catching that than others. I seem to remember maybe an exchange, yeah, about factual accuracy and scolding ChatGPT for hallucinating data. Like, was that something that you caught frequently while you were kind of reading through the logs and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. There were a lot of there were a lot of examples where someone would be asking you to draft like a really important government document, like something related to like sections of a comprehensive plan or something like that, or like an audit report, and ChatGPT would just say something that's totally incorrect. And but for the most part, I think the city employees using it were being pretty diligent about double checking that. And like I tried my best to like see if I could find any factual errors that had slipped through into like actual published documents that were released publicly. And I couldn't confirm any, but just like the volume and like the specificity, like I'm sure they're out there. It's just it's really like it's hard to double check. And I think there's also raised the question of like how much time now are city employees spending double checking this work, and like does that actually offset some of the efficiency of using a chatbot to just create it for you if you're having to double check every single thing? Because there were a ton of errors that slipped through, and you could tell that they were spending a lot of time catching that.
Yeah. And you said it seems to be pretty pervasive throughout, like it's not limited to any one department. Like this is kind of like a, yeah, an en masse sort of thing, right? Like, were you seeing it in any specific departments or was it just, yeah, just broad?
Yeah, it wasn't every single city employee, obviously, but because especially all of these examples I found where this is mostly people kind of using it on their own initiative, like not really like their boss isn't necessarily telling them to. It's kind of just someone at work, using this new tool to maybe try to save some time or
Hmm.
cut corners, depending on who you ask. But yeah, it was, and it varied. I did find examples from basically every single city department in both Bellingham and Everett. And I'll say also for people who haven't read it, the stories focus on Bellingham and Everett, which are two kind of mid-sized cities in Washington State. And we only ended up focusing on those because they were the fastest and most responsive to my requests. I ended up filing requests with about a dozen Washington cities. And at a certain point, it was like these two cities closed out the request, and it was kind of we got to the point where we wanted to publish something, but they aren't necessarily outliers. But yeah, it varied by department. Like I think IT department was one that both IT departments were using it quite a bit. I got a lot of records from police departments. Lots of kind of communication shops are using it quite a bit. But like, like the fire department, right? Like, I think I ended up getting like one or two ChatGPT logs from firefighters. And they were both like screenshots from the mobile phone app, obviously, because they're out fighting fires and like not sitting at the computer using ChatGPT. But especially for departments that have a lot of like email job type positions, I think you'll find quite a bit.
Yeah, I hardly think that the firefighters are agonizing over an Instagram post caption.
Well,
But yeah,
it was actually it was kind of endearing actually. The one I got was it was a firefighter asking me for help writing a letter to the mayor, like thanking her for coming along on a ride, and then
yeah,
he was saying like he told ChatGPT like I didn't go to college, I'm not a very good writer. Can you help me write this professional letter to the mayor? And it was like thank you for showing leadership and joining us for this ride along or whatever. Um,
yeah,
I thought that was kind of endearing actually.
yeah. Well, and that was something, and full disclosure to the audience, like Nate and I talked about this before. That was something that I remember you bringing up is that people are maybe a bit more candid with ChatGPT than other people might realize. Were there other things that you noticed while you were kind of like reading through logs or combing through returns that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think in general, and I think one of the reasons why this could be a pretty fruitful records request is that I think people tend to turn to tools like ChatGPT when they have difficult problems and questions. Like if you need to send a simple email to a coworker, I think you can probably just write that yourself. But if it's like a sensitive topic, I think a lot of people struggle with that. I think especially like, I think most people aren't don't write a lot and like genuinely like struggle sometimes to like articulate maybe difficult conversations that need to happen. And so I think people tend like the questions people ask ChatGPT for tend to be pretty revealing. I think there were people asking it like, how do I convince the city I work for to like fund climate change? They keep refusing to do that, and it's really frustrating me. There are people asking it to like write emails to coworkers saying your performance on that project was really subpar and bad. There's like lots of labor dispute stuff happening. A lot of it's kind of like messy internal drama that's not necessarily a full news story in itself, but I think some of it is. And yeah, I think just really revealing overall.
Yeah, and that was something that you mentioned in, I think, the second story about like sensitive information and PII. Um, how often were you hitting that in like redactions or possible denials or, having to make an appeal to the different agencies that you were requesting these from?
Yeah, not super often. I think there were like a few, and the way these get released, they get released by city employee basically. So you get one file with the entire chat log of each employee. So and it was redactions were like pretty rare, but still off common enough to the point where I think it is kind of a issue and an interesting problem
Hmm.
because like chatbots like ChatGPT are famously not very secure when it comes to the data that's getting entered into them. But which makes it notable that like some of these chat logs are coming back with redactions from records officers because the user had inputted information about an ongoing police investigation or like internal city computer code for tracking homeless encampments. They had like passwords and cybersecurity vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Or like people were using it for like performance review evaluations. And that was all redacted, which I think is really interesting.
Definitely. Um, yeah, I mean, and then even the follow-ups that you've been doing since the reporting, have there been um I don't know, like you published a story recently about like the city of Seattle, kind of writing those policies and writing an AI plan. But even in the second story in the series, like you talk about how the plan for AI policies were written in part by ChatGPT as well. Like, do you see some of these departments kind of already responding to the requests that you've been filing and like maybe starting to change their ways or change how they're using these tools?
Yeah, I think, and in when I talked like the assistant city attorney in Bellingham called when I was working on the request and like said that like it was the first time they received this request and it had been kind of helpful and illuminating for them. Yeah, so a lot of cities are putting policies in place right now, kind of locking down, I think, how employees can or should be using this technology.
Hmm.
And one thing I think that I heard from quite a few cities is that they're switching to Copilot now, basically, because Microsoft Copilot, there's like a separate there's a government version for all the government clients where it's basically the same thing, the same like Microsoft Office and PowerPoint and Word and stuff. But it's hosted on more secure servers and it has a couple other things. But Copilot became available to government clients through that earlier this year. Um, so a lot of local government jurisdictions are now telling employees like, hey, stop using ChatGPT, basically, and only use Copilot going forward. And I haven't tried requesting Copilot chat logs yet. I imagine it's pretty similar. But I think so. I think that'll be pretty fruitful going forward for records requests. In addition to ChatGPT, because that is still the world's most popular chatbot, and I think a lot of people are still using it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll put in the chat too, Kelly Kaufman, the engagement reporter at Muckrock, has pulled together a call out sort of like form where if people have, government agencies or local governments that they're interested in kind of finding out more about how they're using ChatGPT, like you can fill out the form and then Kelly will maybe send out some requests. So let me pop that in. I know she's already filed some requests in response to, yeah, people who have had questions and have been curious about this in their government or maybe a government that they're focusing on for reporting or otherwise. So just sharing that as a resource. But
I'll say also that like I'm only familiar with Washington State public records law, and I think we have a pretty strong records law here actually, and I imagine in other states this should be possible, because I think like everything about this says it's public record, right? Like we were saying earlier. But yeah, like I don't know. Like I've heard from some reporters who've had pushback already, who tried to file this in other jurisdictions. Um, I think it is a new type of records request that most places haven't dealt with yet.
yeah.
And I'm still getting pushback from a lot of jurisdictions in Washington that I'm still trying to kind of strategize about how exactly to get past that because I've had records officers say they don't know how to gather these records or that it's not considered public record or that they looked and couldn't find any, which I don't think is true because I've also like one person said they had looked and hadn't found any, and then like a different reporter I know filed a similar request and got ChatGPT logs. Um, so I don't know. You might encounter some pushback, and I don't have any amazing advice on how to deal with that. But yeah, yeah, that the kind of transitory sort of ideation argument is one I've heard as well.
Yeah. And that's there someone in the chat had just put the only objection they could see is that the logs constitute drafts, which aren't public record in some jurisdictions. That was my gut feeling as well when Nate and I had talked about this initially, is that it might be kind of swept under the deliberative process or like, draft document exemption, which again, as Brian even points out, can vary state to state, and things like that, but does seem kind of like a new frontier for FOIA and for precedent. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how different agencies and certainly different states catch up to it.
Yeah.
But
And I do think it's, even if it is used for drafting, I think there's a very strong transparency argument. Especially because in the examples we've seen, when people say they're only using it for drafting, that often means copying entire paragraphs from its output and just releasing those to the public unchanged. And I think that goes beyond what you would consider normal drafting or wordsmithing stuff. Like that's relying on its output entirely. And in that case, I think the public has a right to see the prompts. Like what was the input? And some jurisdictions have policies in place already saying that anything produced by ChatGPT in whole or part should have like a little line somewhere saying like this document was produced by ChatGPT. And as far as I can tell, that advice is almost never being followed. Which I think adds to the argument that this is important for transparency, so we can actually see what prompts are being used and how the outputs are being used.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, cool. Well, do we want to maybe get into kind of the
Yeah,
more technical
there's
side of filing and what you're getting back?
yeah, definitely, yeah, and I see a bunch of questions in the chat that we can we'll definitely make sure we get back to those as well.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so basically, my approach for this when I first started doing it, I just asked for copies of any conversation with any chatbot that had happened, and people told me that was too broad and they couldn't do that. So I narrowed it down to ChatGPT. And the exact language I used is it's in the pointer story, and we'll send that in the chat as well. But yeah, so I ended up when I first started doing, and I can share my screen actually to kind
Mhm.
of show some examples of what I'm talking about. Cool. So when I first started filing, oh, and then here's the language that we'll send later also. When I first started filing it, people send it back in like a variety of different formats because I think a lot of people don't know how to export their ChatGPT history. So this is probably the worst one that I got. Um, as you
Whoa.
can see, this is one
That
massive
is,
screenshot.
yeah.
Um, and this was just, and I got like dozens of these, right? And just atrocious to read through and try to navigate. Um, so I started including instructions, um, and that was from a police officer. Um, which, and I'll say also, I think a lot of the police records have been some of the most illuminating, just because there's lots of stuff like this. Um, I think it's really like they were asking how to create a new unit or something. And I know the last FOIA Friday was about flock
Hmm.
cameras. In both Bellingham and Everett, I got multiple chat logs from they had police officers asking questions about flock cameras, like both like create an operating policy for this, or like what are some questions community members might have about flock being placed in their community, create like an outreach plan to, meet with people and talk about their concerns. Um, I thought that was really illuminating. Um, so yeah, so to get rid of the screenshot thing, I started including these instructions. And this is really ideal and helpful actually, because then basically when you export your ChatGPT history into a JSON file like this, you get every message they've sent in chronological order. And so here's an example of what, um, or actually, I'll first just show like what the export process looks like on the user's end, because it's super easy. Like if a records officer tells you this is too burdensome, this is how you export. It takes like 5 seconds. So you just click on basically tell them to click on their profile, go to data controls, and then export data. And then this will send the user an email with all of their chats, basically. And then they can send that to the records officer for redaction, and then they can send it to you. And so what that creates is a folder that looks like this. Um, and so this has a couple different things that are really helpful. The most helpful one is this. This is the all of the chats just in a really easily readable HTML file. And so you can use Command F to search through this. And it's in chronological order. And then it also has this file, which is the user information. So that's the email they signed up for it with. And then it has their birth year for some reason. But so you can use this to confirm which city employee basically was using it. And then with this, it doesn't show the date the chats were sent, which is actually, I think, pretty important context. So finding that is kind of a hassle, and there might be an easier way to do this. But you basically click on this conversations file, which includes the entire conversation in this weird kind of file format. Um, See, so it says like it's the same message as this one, just not readable at all. But if you find the chat you're looking for basically, and then find where it says create time, that's the time it was created in like Unix time. So if you just enter that into a search engine, you'll be able to decipher that into the time it was sent. But yeah, so that's basically that's what kind of the more technical side of what this looks like. And I think for Copilot, I think it's a somewhat similar procedure.
Definitely. I mean, one of the questions that was in the chat that I think is good to talk about now is like, yeah, you included the technical instructions, right? Like you just walked through them, but and you mentioned this in your story a little bit, like how did the back and forth process go? Like what was that? You filed a good chunk of requests, so that's however many, officers that you're having to talk to navigate those requests. Like what was that process like?
Yeah, it's there's been I had one records officer call and just ask for sort of what exactly I was looking for and how they could help with that. I think one and like I'm conscious that this is a pretty this is a very large request and it is like a large lift, I think, because records officers do have to sort through these chat histories to look for anything that has to be redacted, right? And that some of these are thousands of pages, like thousands of pages long on their own, right? And if everyone's following the rules, there shouldn't be any need to have any redactions because you're not supposed to put confidential information into ChatGPT. But
Hmm.
that's clearly not happening all the time. So there is a need to redact some of these. So yeah, it's a heavy lift, but and some places have pushed back and said they weren't really sure how to gather it. The way that Bellingham and Everett complied with my request was by literally just sending an email to every city employee with the instructions, um, asking them to export their chat history, and that was great. But I think some records officers have like assumed that they would have to do it on the back end somehow, which isn't possible. Um, yeah, so I'm still figuring out the best way to kind of explain this and make it easier for everyone involved in the process.
Definitely. Um, and yeah, I will again plug the requests that Kelly has made. Some of them have started to come back, and a lot of them are still in progress. But like we've got one, and I'll throw it up on my screen right now. It's pretty short response. You know, from Kelly with like the same instructions that you and Alex had written up in the Pointer article, and then just getting a very clear response of the district not using ChatGPT at all. Was that something that you encountered where maybe a PIO was like, no, we don't use ChatGPT, but you encountered situations where people were using it while logged out, or, you know, it seems kind of like it's up to an honor system in a way, with this kind of technology.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because a lot of this, like, this isn't, a lot of the usage isn't at the direction of supervisors. It's just people using this new productivity tool that's online on their own initiative. So,
Mhm.
it is kind of an honor system, right? And one thing that's been interesting is that I haven't gotten any back yet from elected officials. Um, and I don't necessarily, I kind of like I don't know if it's my hunch or my suspicion is that like they're more familiar with records requests and maybe more savvy about how and when they use things that might be requestable. Like the mayor of Bellingham, when we were talking, she kind of mentioned in her interview that she's used ChatGPT for in her own role as mayor. But I didn't get any records back from her in my requests, and so I asked like why that was the case, and she said, "Oh, I haven't been logging in, so none of them are saved." Which I think is kind of a records retention issue. I don't not believe her. Like I'm sure she who just accidentally wasn't logging in. And she says that going forward, she's making sure that she logs in when she's using it for like substantial stuff. And she said that all the past stuff she'd used it for had been purely transitory. And so we kind of have to just take her word on that because we don't have those records because she wasn't logged in. But yeah, there are lots of really interesting records retention issues associated with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, are there other good things that you think people should keep in mind if they're, going down this journey in their their municipality, or, if you're a reporter, then your market or things like that. Obviously, bearing in mind that you are more of an expert in Washington public records law, and I am more of an expert in Illinois public records law. But obviously, this is a technology that seems to be used pretty much by everyone, or at least one person per agency, it seems.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And like, this is something I'm still new to experimenting with, and I really, just the process of requesting these records. I think it's something that's new for everyone. That there's not a whole lot of uh, precedent for how places should handle it.
Mhm.
But I think, I think we've talked a lot about like the arguments for why this is a public record and why it should be considered that. And yeah, I think just ending it, trying to just provide as much information on the best way to how to export the chat logs, how to help employees do that. Um, I think like the volume I got back was pretty large, and a lot of it was pretty mundane stuff. So like I'd recommend developing like a good file management system to like um, quickly scan through all of the kind of boring things, find the interesting parts, and sort of sort that all out. Um, and yeah, yeah, I think it's really revealing. I think it's weirdly intimate, honestly, seeing someone's chat messages like that. And so we decided not to name individual employees in the story. And that's, obviously that's your own decision if you ended up doing a similar story. I think there are arguments for and against, like, these are mostly not public facing officials who are like didn't realize that their chat logs could become public, and there was some like moderately embarrassing stuff in there, like using it to write cover letters for jobs in the private sectors or like complaining about coworkers and like so I think it's good to make a judgment call there about the newsworthiness of some of it. But if they're a public official, like it's public record. So
Yeah, it feels almost like I don't know, like reading someone's diary, I guess, if they're like a power user of ChatGPT and, telling it everything or whatever, like it just kind of intimate's a good way to put it too. Like I feel the same way when I'm reading through like emails or, text messages or whatever, even if it's related to a story I'm on, I'm like, I don't need to know that you wanted Chipotle for lunch, like that kind of thing. But yeah, well maybe we get cracking on some questions from folks that
yeah,
are in the chat. You guys have been sending in some great questions. And I know some of them have been answered, but I'll just kind of go through maybe chronologically, like we can
yeah.
start through
Um, and
any
I'll have to
Mhm.
head out at about 10:45-ish, but I'll send my email and I'll be happy to follow up on any of these questions also.
Absolutely. Well, there's a good one from Sylvia to start, I think, just to kick us off, which is with so many logs to go through, where do you recommend we start? I mean, as you were kind of going through the different returns you were getting back from agencies, was there something that you were looking for first, like when you would really get into a groove of doing it, or were you just like, all right, like let me make some coffee, let me sit back and just kind of read through the whole log?
That was a lot of it. I think what I was mainly looking for is examples where it had actually been used for publicly published documents, basically. And sometimes that was as simple as just like Googling, like for the comprehensive plan, right? I saw that there were messages where someone was asking for help drafting parts of a comp plan. So it was kind of a matter of just pulling up the actual published comp plan document and doing a side-by-side comparison to see like, did this actually make its way in there? Um, because I think like there are lots of examples of people asking it questions where it's hard to determine the extent to which they're kind of just like experimenting or brainstorming or versus actually using it for policy advice, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of people just use it the same way you use Google, and I don't think it's necessarily like that interesting. But like finding examples where it's actually made its way into published documents, I think is really interesting, and then looking to see if any errors have made their way into public documents as well.
Definitely. Um, we have one from, see, this one's more technical from Jackson. Did you run into anyone claiming they no longer had their ChatGPT log? I think the times I've used it, I've never had my history saved from prior logs, which you talked about a little bit with the mayor of Bellingham, but
Yeah. The Mayor of Bellingham was one person who was saying that. Um, but I mean, if at this point, I don't know about earlier models, but at this point, if you're logging in with your email, which ChatGPT does prompt you to do, it should save every single message you've ever sent with it, going back to when you signed up. And again, I haven't tried this with Copilot yet, but ChatGPT, as long as you're logging in with an email, it should have everything saved, kind of off to the side.
yeah. There are some questions about like appeals and like kind of handling denials and stuff, which I know we talked about a little bit, but how did you overcome pushback to the request that you would file? Was it just kind of a conversation and just like leveling with a FOIA officer, or was it um I don't know, again, we talked about how there's not too much precedent about this, but yeah, how did you handle that?
Yeah, and I'm still working on it, honestly, with some jurisdictions. But yeah, just kind of explaining what I was looking for and what asking how I can make the process easier, I think was ended up being helpful.
Definitely. Let me see, let me see. Got a lot of the technical stuff. Let's see. Are you specifying particular government employees by name or title for the search ChatGPT logs? Like, I don't
I
know.
made my request super broad and just asked for every single city employee. I would like I think depending on like what your beat is and what type of story you're doing, I would recommend narrowing it though, because these requests did take like it took like 5 months for the fastest one to get closed out, and a lot of it returns things that weren't interesting that weren't relevant. Like if if you're only like a police reporter or something, I would recommend focusing on that or like a school district and trying to limit it a bit more to which departments you're asking for. But yeah, I didn't name any specific people. I was just like vaguely all public officials in this jurisdiction.
That is a question that I hadn't asked, which is yeah, what was your timeline of filing these? Like from the first like was there a like were you talking months, especially because people had never done it before, or was it, relatively faster once you were asking for more from the same places now that they actually knew how to file or not file, export the
Yeah.
records themselves?
Yeah, so I think with Bellingham and Everett, the first ones to actually close out the request. Like all the others are still outstanding, so I'm still getting installments.
Okay.
But with those two cities, I think I filed a request in like probably February or March of this year,
Okay.
and then it was probably 2 months later I got the first installment, and then I would continue to get an installment every 2 or so weeks up until honestly like July, late July. So it's been a kind of lengthy-ish process, and other cities are still taking a long time. Yeah,
Yeah, and I noticed that's language that you include in your draft is like release it in installments as it's available, instead of kind of like getting this massive cache like at the end and having it take a long time. That's always something I try to negotiate with FOIA officers is I'm like, just as you get it, like, let's make it easier on the both of us and, instead
yeah.
of yeah, maxing out the amount of, memory or documents you can send in one email. But yeah, let me see.
I just saw that message about the
Yeah.
investigating a potentially strategy by police department and producing a press release.
Mm.
That's one where I feel like it should be possible to file like a very narrow request, right, for like just the police department communications people. Um, and I also think it's like very plausible that ChatGPT was used for that because I did find lots of examples of people asking me for help drafting press releases. I think that's kind of maybe a common use case.
Yeah. And I saw someone too say in the chat, they were like, well, if someone claims they don't use ChatGPT, like request for a sign up email, that might have come from ChatGPT, right? From just like a no reply email address. Um, that feels like something like if I were in that situation, I would request, I would grab the specific like press office email addresses, or do like a domain level search for those keywords. Or I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I mean, email, text message, Slack message, which are also like there's Slack Gov, which is a government client for Slack. And I think we have a previous FOIA Friday on that. And if not, then I'll make it happen in the next few months. Um, but yeah, I'm looking at other ch questions. Are there ones that stand out to you, Nate, as you look through the chat? And people feel free to, send in more as well. Um,
Um, yeah, so someone asked about like Copilot or Claude. I think requesting both those is probably like I think like as with everything public records requests, it's kind of just a matter of balancing scope with time and scale and things like that. Like ideally, you could just file something and get every single chatbot ever, but that's not possible. But I think I don't know how common Claude is. It might be really common with local governments, but I think Copilot is probably going to be fruitful going forward. But again, I'm not entirely familiar with how what records retention looks like with Copilot and kind of how that works. And you think since it's a software being marketed to local governments, so it should have some sort of records retention guidance built in somewhere, but I think it's again something everyone's still trying to figure out. One other thing I forgot to mention, I would also recommend filing requests for if the jurisdiction has any policies related to AI. That was something I did as well. That was super helpful because some jurisdictions already have policy documents in place for how employees can use this. Some are in the process of writing them still. Some are writing them with AI. But then, once you have the policy document, you can see like, okay, a police officer used this to write a press release. Is that allowed? Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's really helpful context.
Yeah. And that would lend itself really well to yeah, understanding records retention or pointing to it as like you should give me an answer about records retention for these types of these documents and things like that. Um,
Um,
but yeah,
And
being
I
mindful
have
of
to
your
I have to
time.
head out in just a second. Here's
Yeah.
one last question. Someone asked about image generation. I found a lot of examples of people using or asking ChatGPT to generate images, but it seemed like they were just goofing off, and like I couldn't find any published examples of. But I mean, we know it's happening with the federal government, right? I mean, like the White House Twitter account posts AI images all the
Yes.
time. And my question is now is can we file a request and get the figure out what the prompts were for those images? Because I think that could be interesting also. Um, but yeah, I'll drop my because happy to answer any more questions. I'll send my email in the chat. Um, and then yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. And definitely let me know if you end up doing a story based on any of this.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and for sharing so much of your expertise. And we'll be sure to pull everything together, including answers to questions in a tip sheet that we'll send out to everyone after, probably after the weekend. But yeah, so early
Awesome.
next week.
Cool. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for attending.
Alrighty. Thank you guys
All right.
and
See you later.
happy requesting, happy filing.
Bye.
Alrighty. Bye. Okay, folks. So, as people are hopping off, like I said, we will upload this recording to YouTube so you can share it with colleagues or revisit it later. And I'll also make sure to pull all of these wonderful questions that you guys have sent in and the answers that Nate had into a tip sheet. Um, and again, I had shared in the chat earlier the wonderful interview that Nate did with Alex at Pointer. That also has a lot of really great resources in the meantime if you are, thinking to file some FOIAs before the end of the business day. But and Nate did share his email. It is, let me share that here. That's not his email. That's just the link again. It is nsanford@knkx.org. And with his blessing, I'll include it in the tip sheet as well. But thank you guys all for being here. And as always, if you have any ideas or questions that you want answered for FOIA Friday, we've got a like Google form that will be included in the tip sheet as well and emailed out alongside the recording. You can always feel free to email over any questions you have and we'll do our best to answer them for you guys. But alrighty. Take care, everyone. Happy filing. Happy FOIA Friday. And have a month.